Welcome to the U Chicago Alumni Association Career Month webinar series. My name is Rachel Burkhan-Rammelfinger, and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar entitled 20-Year Trends to Help You Grow Your Business and Your Career. Today's speaker is college alumnus Eddie Yoon and founder of Eddie Would Grow, a think tank and advisory firm on growth strategy. But more important to our U Chicago audience is that Eddie's first year dorm was Breckenridge, his first roommate was Canadian, and they had a lot of disagreements about the thermostat. It's my pleasure to hand the controls of this webinar over to Eddie.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks to everyone for making time. I don't know if the roommate matching program or algorithm is any better now, but being someone who was born and raised in Hawaii, paired with someone from Canada, you can imagine the disagreements we had about the temperature and the like. So, but that being said, I had a wonderful time outside of my first year, which was a very hard transition to go from Hawaii to Chicago. I had never been to Chicago before. I had applied and attended, and it was quite a transition. So, but I survived that and really enjoyed my U Chicago experience, which was very formative for not just me, but also my career. And these are some of the things that I want to talk about. I think that might be hopefully helpful to you, whether you are running a business or working for a large corporation, or just kind of looking for kind of broad ideas that might be helpful to your career at large. So just a little bit of background. I went right out of school into consulting. I've been a career consultant, and I spent the last 18 years at the Cambridge Group, where I was a senior partner. They were a growth strategy firm acquired by Nielsen about 9 years ago, and I had done quite an extensive amount of growth strategy work for largely business to consumer companies and whatnot. About a year and a half ago, I left to join or start my own hang up my own shingle. It's a firm called Eddie Would Grow. I'll explain the name in a little bit, but I'm still doing growth strategy, but on a much more limited basis. I'm spending much more time writing and speaking and talking about why companies grow and how do you actually make that work on a systemic basis. So let's get into it, and we can talk about why all my background kind of is helpful context here. So the narrative that I want to tell with you today is about the whole idea of growth. And one of the broad ideas is you always want to swim with an ocean current and never against it. And I know this well growing up in Hawaii, that you always respect the ocean, and no matter how good of a swimmer you are, if the current wants to take you in the opposite direction, that's where you're going. And I think business is actually very, very similar to that regard, and I'll explain to you why and some of the facts that back it up. One of the other observations that I have is that there are a number of 20-year currents, so 20-year trends that are either going to put a headwind or a tailwind in a category or a business, and that you should be aware of them before you make your career choices or as you make a different set of decisions about what you want to do. And that finally, if you have two things, testimonials and a track record, that's going to be kind of a life vest and a paddleboard for your career. So these are things that will help keep you afloat no matter what's going on in the marketplace, but also I think give you the autonomy to kind of dictate where you want to go and how and when. And so this is kind of the story that we'll talk through today. Okay. So as you can imagine, coming from Hawaii, I have an affinity for all the lessons that I can learn from big wave riders. So this one is a gentleman by the name of Eddie Aikau. He was a very famous waterman. So that means a big wave surfer, diver, a swimmer, a lifeguard extraordinaire. And he was quite famous for a number of reasons. Actually, there was an ESPN documentary, 30 for 30, on it if you want to check it out. But there was a group called Hokulea that tried to replicate the ancient Hawaiians' navigation by the stars, which is how they kind of circumnavigated all of Polynesia and the Pacific Ocean. So think the movie Moana as an example there. But on the maiden voyage, they had Eddie Aikau participate with it, and they got into some trouble a little bit offshore, and the canoe capsized, and he went for help, and they never saw him again. They were eventually rescued, but he passed as a result of his heroism. And there's a big wave surf competition that's been notable on the North Shore of Oahu called the Eddie Cow. It's been held off and on because over the years, just because certain things need to be true. The conditions need to be right. It needs to be above 30 feet in size, so the really big waves at Waimea Bay. And 30-foot Hawaiian standards are really, you have to add it double because they measure it from the front versus the back, or the back versus the front. So you're talking about a 60-foot wave. They invite the top big wave surfers from around the world, and when the Eddie Aikau happens, everyone, no matter where they are, they jump on a plane and they go down to surf the competition. And so that kind of catchphrase, Eddie would go, is kind of what I named my firm after, Eddie would grow. I think to kind of as in tribute to the heroism and courage and generosity that Eddie Aikau had. But I also think some of the lessons learned about what it really takes to surf unimaginably large waves, which is a very different thing entirely than kind of normal things that are out there. And then between Eddie Aikau and this gentleman here, Laird Hamilton, who is one of the best big wave surfers in the world, but actually an innovation pioneer. So he helped pioneer the whole kind of tow-in surfing, where in order to catch the largest waves that are out there, you have to have a jet ski tow you in and another jet ski looking to rescue the people that might get into trouble there. So here he is on a hydrofoil, which has a very large fin that extends down, and it enables him to catch a wave well before it breaks, even miles out from the shore break, which is quite amazing. He looks like he's kind of floating out there. And that's really the point that I want to talk about, is that you have to really find the current under the wave. What Laird figured out was that in every wave, long before it actually crashes, there is energy and kind of that hydrodynamics that are going on well underneath the surface there. And that it's only when the wave comes against dry land and that space actually shrinks, that the wave crests and then crashes on the shore of the beach there. And the key point of this is that anytime you see a growth opportunity happening, any innovation or a company that's really winning, or another company that's really shrinking, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal about Macy trying to shrink its way to growth because as a big department store retailer, it's kind of out of trend. But the point being is that if you understand that there is a current underneath the wave well before the wave actually breaks, that you can catch it much, much earlier, and that these 20-year trends really exist quite all over the place in terms of all kinds of business and other areas beyond business. McKinsey had done a study actually quantifying some of this. So they looked at over 800 companies and why and how they grew, and the sources of it you can see on the left-hand side. But kind of the big takeaway that they had was that a fraction of the growth that companies actually drove came from market share gain, which in my experience as a growth strategist is the primary way that people try to grow, is to say, I have a business, I'm in the bottled water business, and I'm competing with somebody else, and in order for me to grow, that person has to lose. And what you can see is that counterintuitively, it's actually the least effective growth strategy that's out there, which is ironic because it's probably the most employed. M&A, mergers and acquisitions, is another one. So people try to buy their way to growth, which can kind of sort of work, but not really. And what they really call is the dominant source of growth is what they call portfolio momentum, which is really the underlying category trend. And so the net of it is that if your business or your brand is growing, that over 60% of your total growth comes from the underlying current of the category. And so what that actually means, I think it can be either helpful if you're in a good category that has strong tailwinds, or despairing in the opposite situation, but that the vast majority of what drives your business's growth is actually out of your control. And that in as much as you should be thinking about the different things or companies you should buy or tactics to compete better, what you really ought to be thinking about is what is the underlying trend in the current within the category, and am I in a good place and should I be in a different place there? So at a very fundamental level, what it also raises is the question of what drives category growth. And this is kind of my very simplistic way of looking at the world, is that every category kind of starts out where in the bottom left, where it's a niche category because some of the people use the category some of the time. And eventually it gets to the point where those people really like it and they say, well, I start to use it most of the time. That's number two. It's a growth market. And then you become a mass market where the vast majority of the people do it most of the time, and that's kind of where it is. But what people don't realize is that everything becomes obsolete at some point, and that categories have a natural life cycle from niche to growth to mass market and eventually to decline. And you can see this also. There's another funny Wall Street Journal article the other day about the office phone and how they're becoming increasingly irrelevant thanks to iPhones that are out there, and yet they're becoming that much more complex and harder to use. And so if you think about this, is that the good and the bad news is that every category's life cycle it can be predictable. You can know what it is. Now, you don't know necessarily when it's going to happen and what phase you're in. But it's a principle that I outline around category growth is really the driver of brand growth, and that every category has a life cycle, and that if you better understand where you are in that life cycle, you can make far better decisions to either grow your business or to fix your career and make it more optimal. When I have had clients or friends or colleagues ask me about career advice, that's the number one thing I say is pick a job in a category that is growing healthily, and that actually matters far more than your title, your compensation. If the underlying category is growing, then your business is likely to grow, and then your job and your career will likely grow. But I mean, conversely, if you pick a great job with great title and great perks, but it's in a dying category, that's not going to end well for you either way. Now, this gets to the point of, in a world where every category is growing and every category or declining at some level, the image that I wanted to leave you, as I've talked about the ocean in Hawaii with, is that everybody is on the cusp of something like this, is that you're either the feller on the top there who is kind of hating life and really in a bad point and is about to get, hopefully not really harmed too badly there, or you're the person on the bottom there looking above and saying, well, how do I avoid that? And if you've ever been in the ocean or surfed or spent any time there, what you know is that the bottom person, what they really need to do is to dive into the wave. It's, duck dive deeply into the wave, and you come out on the other end. It's a little bit scary, but you're going to be far safer than either swimming for shore or waiting for the wave to crash on you. And that the truth of the matter is that no matter what business you're in or what company you work for, or even if you're not in business, is that everything that you're looking for is on the other side of fear. And so no matter how fearful it looks, that you have to really punch through it and face it and confront it and come out on the other end in a much better place. And so this is kind of the narrative, just a little bit of urgency to people, is that this is not just theory. I see this all the time in business, and I suspect that people are feeling it too. Now, this is all nice and well, but let's talk about some of the 20-year currents to watch for that you can look at. And so this is across my career. I've done a lot of research and kind of studying about what drives companies' growth and whatnot. And some of these I'll touch upon in a little bit, but things like cooking, I think, are got a real headwind to them, that people are increasingly cooking less likely, and that what really people want is they want to eat, drink, and be merry. And I'll talk about this in a little bit. Driver's licenses are going down, delivery of food and other things are going up quite a bit. College enrollment is actually declining. Ironic, as I'm talking a East Chicago alumni thing, and it's not happening to Chicago, but it is actually a big trend, and that the nature of its decline has a really dramatic impact on what we think about multicultural opportunities and demand and risks that are out there. That traditional retail banking is on the decline, and that every great brand should be a bank, and that the last bit is that your kind of career advice, and these are things that I don't think really many people talk about, is that a lot of the career advice is about how do you win in your corporation, and either by pedigree and titles. And you think about everything like LinkedIn and everything, it's all oriented around pedigree and titles. And I actually think it's wrong, is that what people ought to be looking at is creating what Kevin Maney, is an author and former columnist at Newsweek, is called a personal enterprise, which is basically what I am. Is Eddie Would Grow is a one-man shop. It's a personal enterprise, a solopreneur, you can call it whatever it is, but I was able to do it because I was blessed with a strong set of testimonials and track record, and that if you have those two things, that you're really in great position to actually create a personal enterprise. And so we'll talk about what this looks like in some of these trends in a little bit more detail. So I had written a piece a little over a year ago about the challenges that the grocery industry is facing, is that only 10% of Americans actually love to cook and do it very frequently. In that the analogy that I had was, I think cooking may become the new sewing, where all of us wear clothes, presumably. All of us have probably bought our clothing versus actually handmade them ourselves. But at one time, you can imagine most clothing was hand sewn through thread and fabric that you got on your own. And that at some point along between the past and today, that sewing became a lost art. It became something that wasn't really commonplace outside of a hobby. And that this is my prediction, is that cooking may actually go the same way. It's not to say that cooking will completely disappear, but the net effect of the Food Network and other cooking shows is that I've actually believe what's happened is that food TV has raised the bar for cooking to be so high that it's actually discouraged people from believing that they could actually acquire this skill, broadly speaking, across a wide array of dishes to cook on an everyday basis. And so I liken it to the high school that I went to in Hawaii. There was a chemistry teacher who he attended college the same time as Yo-Yo Ma and played the cello and actually sat next to Yo-Yo Ma there. And what he claims is that that was the last time that he'd ever played the cello, because not because of how great Yo-Yo Ma was, but he noticed the gulf between Yo-Yo Ma's skill and his skill was so great. And even though he sat second chair, but it was so great that he was like, I'm never going to be that good, so why bother? So he just quit. And I actually think that the reaction to food TV is analogous to that, and that some people will still cook. You might pick something that you want to be good at. Maybe it's a dessert or a specialty, or maybe you're the grill master. But the whole idea of cooking on a regular basis and really loving it is something that I'm seeing that's shrinking over time. And I think we're actually at a tipping point where the amount of money that people are spending to eat out has exceeded the amount of money that people spend on grocery. And principally, if you look at some of the challenges that the big food companies are having, that, you know, it might be the case that they're making bad decisions or doing some things less good, and it might also be the case that they just have a natural headwind that they can't really overcome, which is that people don't want to cook anymore nearly as much as they used to. Now, you can ask the other question of, well, are there food companies that are winning? And Domino's is actually one that's doing quite well. And if you had actually asked the question, this is a fun trivia question to ask at cocktail parties and whatnot, but you know, you go back in time to 2010 and you could pick one of these stocks, which ones would you bet on? And I would bet that not many of us would have figured out that Domino's would have actually outperformed Netflix and Tesla and Amazon and Apple. And you imagine this is true for a couple of reasons. Number one, pizza's a legal narcotic, and in general, if you're in a business that's a legal narcotic like coffee or chocolate, and that's a good business to be in there with it. But Domino's has done a great job of not just being a pizza company, not just being a delivery company, but a technology company. So they're at the forefront of using mobile to order pizzas, even social. Remember, you could have that whole send a tweet and get a pizza that way. They're testing drone delivery. They're testing autonomous cars. They are as much of a technology company as anyone out there, and that this is really the case to talk about that this whole idea of creating a new category through a breakthrough product innovation and breakthrough business model innovation, something that I'll talk to in a little bit, is actually a great trend, and that delivery is something that you can just continue to count on being a force to be reckoned with going forward, especially as driver's licenses decline. The other kind of 20-year trend that I want to talk about is the death of many colleges out there. The Atlantic has talked about how college tuition pricing has finally taken a break and slowing down and might even go down. Clay Christensen, the HBS professor, has said that half of American colleges could be bankrupt in 10 to 15 years. And you wonder, like, what is going on here? And what you find is that on the right-hand side, my analysis shows that from 2010 to 2015, college enrollment finally went down. And as a good econ and major from the University of Chicago, when demand falls, supply has problems with it, and you can't raise pricing there. And so now, what's not only interesting about this is, so certainly tuition will drop, colleges will fail, but the nature of the growth and decline is actually quite important too. I have a concept called share of growth, which I actually believe is a far more effective tool than just measuring share of market. But when you look at why did college enrollment go down, what you actually see is that it's not as simple that every demographic went down, that actually the net 1 million decline was a function of 2 million fewer college students, of whom 80% of them were white, and plus 1 million more college students, half of which were either mixed race or Hispanic or foreign students. And so what that actually means is that it's not just a college trend that's going to matter, but the very nature of who a college graduate could dramatically change from a demographic and ethnic perspective. And that has a wide set of ripple effects from a demand perspective on a wide variety of categories, be it food and beverage, media, and whatnot there. And so, again, this is one of those trends that you can get ahead of and not just wait for, 2044 when America will be majority minority, but that if your business is heavily dependent upon college graduates, from a demand perspective, then you really have to be on top of what are actually shaping the forces that are shaping the different demographics of colleges that are out there. And if you're like me, I have 3 children that are 10, 12, and 14. Good news, tuition's not going to go up any further. Hopefully it should decline. We'll see if that actually happens at Chicago or not, but that should be the broad trend. Another 20-year trend to talk about is this idea of Starbucks being one of the top regional banks, and that some of the biggest prognosticators in the fintech side have said that the biggest banks in the world won't be just regular financial institutions, they'll be tech companies. And I would submit that there are actually quite a bit more that are interesting there too. So another article that I had written about Starbucks and Netflix kind of talks about this whole idea. Those of you who can silently raise your hand, how many of you have a Starbucks app on your phone? And did you realize that at any given time that Starbucks has about $1 billion of cash loaded onto its app, and that they make quite a bit of profit off the interest-free negative working capital loan that many people give to Starbucks in exchange for a loyalty program that's just kind of okay. It's not necessarily great or anything, but it makes it slightly more convenient. But you could argue that Starbucks is a bank at some level, and when you consider how razor-thin retail margins are, being a financial services institution at the same time is a really powerful thing. And frankly, any brand that has great power like Starbucks and taps into some of their super consumers, has the ability to do this, especially because, up until recently, banks really give you very little interest rate, and the drivers of their profitability are basically is how able are they to punish people for having low balances and penalties, which is not a great business model. The last trend that I wanted to talk to that I think is germane to this broader discussion is I talked about this whole notion of the personal enterprise, and that a third of U.S. workers are freelancers, and about projected to be 40% shortly. When you ask people why they want to become a personal enterprise or a solopreneur, as it were, it's flexibility, and I can attest to that. As I have fantastic autonomy in my life now. I work from home. I've cut out my commute. I am able to take my kids to school and back, and just be around for family and stuff. But I haven't really sacrificed anything. It's actually, I would say, a far better value proposition for me than even when I was a senior partner at a consulting firm, for frankly a lot less work and effort behind it. And so it's something that has been a real blessing to me, and I wouldn't trade it in. And it's clearly the case that most people wouldn't trade their freelance or entrepreneur life back for a normal job, no matter what the money is. And I call out 2 books written by friends. Christopher Lochhead, 3-time Silicon Valley CMO, author of Play Bigger, and host of the Legends and Losers podcast, which is fantastic, just wrote a short book called Niche Down about this whole idea of becoming a personal enterprise. And Dory Clark, fellow HBR author, has written another book that I highly recommend if this is something that you're interested in. But when people ask me for my career advice, this is the one that I always say is, pick a company that has a 20-year trend, or be prepared to actually become this personal enterprise. And and this to me is perhaps the biggest trend that I think is to come is, you probably can't, it's hard probably to do this right out the gate out of college, but if you've gotten enough time and work experience and expertise, you probably have more of an ability to do this than you realize, and that there's no job out there that will give you the same degree of autonomy, fulfillment, flexibility, and frankly, in many cases, the economics that are superior by being a freelancer or this personal enterprise. And also, let's talk about what that actually looks like and what needs to be true for that to happen. And this gets to my whole idea of testimonials and a track record, or this kind of career life vest and paddleboard here. So first off is you have to have a strong point of view, right? And this is kind of my equivalent of the Common Core. So UChicago had exactly the right idea. There are a core set of great books and ideas that you have to consider. And the only kind of addendum that I would have to that is not only do those core books and core ideas and thinkers help you form and shape critical thinking, but it's actually the case, is true in any industry, but also that you as an individual should add to the canon of what that looks like. And this is my contribution to the canon of growth strategy, which is I've written dozens of articles on HBR about this, which is really to say you should not just grow your share, but grow the market, right? So 9 out of 10 firms use this mindset of stealing market share from one another, and really what they're doing is renting market share, which is not very effective in the long term, and it actually destroys industry profit. And the far better way to do it than growing your share is to grow the market. And it's actually, way simpler than you realize. It's kind of a simple 3-part algebraic equation of you got to grow the number of users in the category, you got to grow units per consumer or price per unit. And if one of those 3 you can grow disproportionately, then you'll grow the category. And by the way, my research has shown that 1% of brands capture 80% of category growth. So it's actually a very effective growth strategy as well too. And that the very best strategy that you can do is to create a new category, create a new market. And that this whole idea of creating a new category, which I define as a breakthrough product innovation combined with breakthrough business model innovation, your revenues will grow 4 times faster and your market cap grows 6 times faster than comparable companies. And that's really, really important to call out, is that if you can do this, this is actually the far superior strategy. But the sad part is that far too few companies actually employ this, and many more should. And this is my kind of personal mission, is to get them to do this. And it's actually far less risky to attempt to create a new category to grow your market than just to stick with the same old, let me just steal some market share and trade off with one another, which is a long-term losing strategy, as I mentioned. So now, this is my worldview on growing a category. My hypothesis and my hope and encouragement to you all on the webinar listening to this is that I believe that you have this as well in your own industry. You may not realize it, but that there are some fundamental ideas. Chicago students are great at pattern recognition, things that are always almost universally true when good things happen in your industry and when bad things happen in your industry. And let me talk about the process of how I built out my worldview and philosophy on growth strategy, and I was able to publish it as well too. This is the next bit that we'll talk about, is that really it's about this testimonials bit, and that really public testimonials are really what you want. And so we all really focus on pedigree and potential, and I'm so grateful to have gone to the University of Chicago, but like at some level, a degree from a college or any institution is really a sign of something that could be good. It's a sign of potential, in that at some point we should stop talking about pedigree and potential and more about track record and testimonials, which is to say, did you actually achieve a result in your industry or your field that was positive for all stakeholders, that contributed meaningfully to that sector, and that other people would talk publicly about it? If you can do that, then you're going to be in great shape. Because I was someone who was, I was a simple guy from Hawaii, was thankful to go to the University of Chicago, and I've been able to be fortunate to appear on CNBC and MSNBC talking about growth strategy. I published a book with the Harvard Business Review that was named by Strategy and Business the best business book in 2017, which was written up in The Economist and Bloomberg Now. And I talk about all of this only because it all started with journaling, which I don't know if that's obvious to folks. And when I always tell people, like, if my first bit of advice is work at a company or an institution that has a tailwind, my second bit of advice is to start a journal if you don't do one already. And it's not necessarily just a personal journal. It could be, that. But I am talking specifically about a business journal. What happened in your work today? How did it make you feel? What did you observe? And that ability to reflect and capture thoughts and remember them over time is really, really important, because that's when kind of pattern recognition started to kick in for me, which gave me the confidence to say, I think I have a point of view that would benefit the business field, and that when you have a strong point of view that would benefit others, eventually the editors out there notice, because the sneaky secret out there is that editors and TV bookers and podcast hosts, bookers and whatnot, they are in a never-ending search for content, and great content in that. And so if you journal, you'll write, you'll hone, you'll do your thinking, you will eventually, what I believe, come up with an idea that's really killer for your industry, and that if you continue to push it out there, you will get noticed, you will get published, and then everything kind of begets one another from there. And so this whole journaling thing is really important. And I'll tell you a quick story. Is the reason why I started journaling was about a third of the way into my consulting career. I got called into the chief marketing officer's office, one of my clients at a $4 billion company. And I didn't know what the purpose of the meeting was, but he really just called me in to chew me out and say, hey, something that you had recommended a number of months back didn't work, and we lost some money because of that. And excuse me, literally that was kind of the takeaway. I suspect that we talked about other things, but that's what I remember. And I left that meeting feeling really despondent and like, boy, does anything that I do at work have any meaning? Am I in the right field? Am I just a mercenary? And that's when I started to take stock. I started to keep a journal, and I didn't know that it was a journal at the time, but I went through every single project that I'd ever done in my consulting career up to that point and cataloged, did it have a marketplace impact? Did I have a compelling strategy that the client bought into? Did it have a compelling insight that my client was like, wow, I'd never thought of it that way before. And my reflections showed that just about every project had an eye-opening insight that the client was like, that was great. I'd never known that before. So that made me feel good. About 2/3 of the time, we got to a really strong strategy that they were able to implement, and about 1/3 of the time, they got to a marketplace result. So, batting 300, good for baseball, and I was like, it's okay, but I would like it to be better. But the journal really helped me catalog the things that were true when things went really well to have a marketplace impact, and to be not only mindful of the things that were in my control, but mindful of the things that were not in my control. In particular, so much of having a marketplace impact really had a function of the timing in the marketplace, what were other people doing, as well as did I have the right client team and the right company that had the wherewithal and the resources and the risk tolerance to actually implement what I did. And what I've really come to realize, and part of the reason why I left the Cambridge group to start my own thing, was that I needed to be more selective with my clients. And so as a senior partner, I could have anywhere from 3 to 9 projects going on at any given time. And now I only kind of limit myself to 1 or 2 because there is kind of a classic bait and switch that happens within consulting, and you really want to avoid that. Where some of you who are in consulting know this. If you've hired consultants, kind of buyer beware. Is if you are the senior partner has the most value to add in any kind of consulting team, and just they have more gray hair, they've more been there, done that, and seen it around a bunch of times. And that the sad part of it is that you spend the least amount of time with a senior partner. In that, it's a little bit like you have this weird pain in your body and you're scared, so you go to a famous teaching hospital, you go to U Chicago, and you meet the head of surgery, you're really excited, and then a first-year med student is standing over you when you wake up, right? That is kind of the consulting experience at the core, which is kind of a challenge. But the part that I think what it really made me realize is that if you're not personal friends or the senior partner's largest and most important client, then you're probably not going to get the full amount of attention. And that my whole business model right now, I have far less volume than I ever did. So I have to be that much more choosy about what clients I take on so that I can make sure that I get the marketplace result that I get to. And that whole marketplace result, that kind of track record of outcomes, is probably the most important thing that you can hope for in your career. And not all of it is in your control, but you might want to just start cataloging some of the wins that you've already had. Because for me, I've had 8 different brands and businesses that I've worked with over time across a wide variety of companies that have doubled or tripled their revenues in a matter of 8 years or less, for a cumulative total of $8 billion. And so again, this is far more client credit goes to my clients and circumstance and serendipity than necessarily me. But these are all companies that I've had a front seat towards, where Ballpark, grew from $250 million to over $500 million, and the number one market leader there. Keurig, I witnessed at a front row seat to see them grow from $1 billion to $4.5 billion. These are all companies that have grown remarkably, and it's the kind of key point is that I've seen what it takes and the common things to double or triple a business size, and they are actually repeatable. And so now on my own, not having a corporate brand to be reliant upon, I'm reliant upon my track record of outcomes. I'm reliant upon the testimonials of clients and others that have seen me add value and contribute along the way. And that has enabled me to become that personal enterprise, which again, I think is the primary trend that people ought to be looking forward to going forward. Because at the end of the day, what we're kind of, all of this is kind of coming down to is that, the importance of 20-year trends, we've talked about it, and you want to make sure that you are mindful of the ones that you want to avoid and mindful of the ones that you want to get after and surf. That journaling and reflecting And eventually that translates into publishing. That becomes really, really important, is that I did not start out with a book with HBR. I started out with my journal because I felt really guilty and bad about being, yelled at by the client. Those journaling thoughts turned into initial articles that I worked very hard and was very lucky to get published in HBR. Those 8 articles grew and grew, and eventually became a book. The book then led to a lot of speaking engagement, led to CNBC and MSNBC and podcasts and the like and stuff. But it's an organic journey that is I am so thankful for, because any little minor twist and turn might not have turned out. But what I recognize is that there was a natural and authentic path for how it happened that I do think, if given enough time and exposure and a little bit of luck, that other people can follow that way too. And that if you leverage your testimonials and track record, you can either use that to maximize your career at the company that you're at currently today, or what I always tell people is that you should, even if you're planning to stay in the near term at a company, that you should give yourself 5 to 10 years to plan to IPO your personal enterprise, which is nothing more than just I quit the corporate life and I'm doing this on my own, and I can dictate the terms and when and with whom I work and whatnot. And I would say that this is not something that I intentionally set out to do, but in many respects of my 18 years that I spent at the Cambridge Group, the front 9, it's a little bit like the kind of Gladwell 10,000 hours, 10 years to really build expertise. The front 9 was spent learning how to solve problems, grow strategy problems, really grow companies. And the last 9 was, as set up for a senior partner, was really simultaneously preparing myself to IPO and start Eddie Would Grow, my personal enterprise. And that my belief is that everybody should be going down this track, and you should have it as a backup, because it'll do one of 2 things: is that you'll always know that you have an escape hatch that you spent 5 to 10 years preparing for the day that you become a personal enterprise and you IPO yourself. But even if you never do that, the confidence that you'll have in knowing that you can kind of do what you believe the right thing to do when you work for a larger company, because you have this in your backup, you will perform better. Some of the best executives that I know out there, and the best clients, the ones who've gotten the track record that I was fortunate to be part of, the reason why they got to where they got to, were able to take the risks, was they had enough confidence to say, if this blows up and I need to look for a new job, I can find another one, or I have something to fall back on. They had enough of a testimonial set and track record in order to do that, and so they really went for it. And that fear, if I go back to that image of the wave, is really the main thing that holds people back from doing great things, and it actually becomes the very thing that undoes and leads to their demise from a career perspective anyway. Versus when you have this preparation, then you have the courage and the confidence to IPO yourself, then you'll have the courage and the confidence to do the same in your career, even if you never pull that escape hatch as well too. So if you want to know more, I've written quite extensively about this. Come follow me on Twitter at Eddie Would Grow. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Here's my email that you can reach out. I also post a monthly newsletter with different facts and videos and data points that are out there. You can see that link below. So I'd encourage you to connect with me either way. And happy to have this opportunity to chat on the webinar, and hopeful that it was helpful to some people.
So we'll now open up to questions. Eddie, right before I ask our first question, I know there was a poll you had wanted to run. Should we run that now just to know who's on our call? Would that be helpful?
Sure. Why don't we do
that? So those of you who are on, I just want to know what industries you work in. There are 5 answers. You can also write, if you work in a different industry, into the question box, or maybe tell us when you ask your question. I see people are still filling out the poll, so we'll give this another second or 2. And so we can just see that 40% of those on the call work in business professional services, consulting or finance, et cetera. 12% business to business, 20% business to consumer, 20% kind of fall in government, healthcare, technology, or education, and 8% others. So the majority are in business professional services.
Great.
Joined us today.
Very helpful.
We'll close that. What might you suggest for the social service field? Someone who's in kind of that area of work, how have you seen it changed, and what trends do you see or suggestions do you have for folks in that area?
Yeah, so let me just, if they would clarify, social services meaning, um, can someone be more specific about that? Is it social work? Is that kind of what I understand it to be?
I think so. We'll give Jennifer a minute to respond to that, but I'm thinking she's meaning social work or sort of direct services to people.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think that here's what's interesting is that I think in many respects, social services, you have the same kind of principles that might come into play there. So if I'm trying to think of like what, now social services may have a different set of metrics that they use to figure out success there. But what I also believe is that uh, so a couple of things on this is that anyone in that field, the same idea of a personal enterprise applies quite nicely to there. So I have a good friend also from Hawaii who, went and I think she has a PhD in public health and worked for a number of, very large scale organizations like the CDC and the Gates Foundation. And eventually what she ended up doing was she found her niche. An area that she could become an expert in, that kind of niche down per my friend Christopher Lockhead's book. And she also did a personal enterprise IPO. So she has an area that she specializes in. I believe it's in sexually transmitted diseases. And she travels around the world conducting primary research about it and gathering data. And she's able to do this from Hawaii, where she can raise children with the support of her family, but also on her own and dictate her own times there. And so I think in many respects she followed the same playbook of built a set of track record at these large organizations and testimonials where she had enough of a network to sustain what she wanted to do and dictate how she wanted to do it. And that I think the broad kind of perspective that I have here is that even if you're not like a career consultant like I am, that is that everybody has expertise in something. That in every consulting firm, team and environment that I've ever been in, is that you usually find that somebody is extraordinarily gifted at one particular thing. Like they're all talented and smart people across a wide variety of things, but everybody has a certain spike that they can be really, really good at, and that what the common assumption is that the spike can be too narrow to really sustain a personal enterprise. But I actually think that it depends on what your expectations are, but your ability to, let me put it this way, expertise has unlimited demand, and that there are a wide variety of ways you can monetize that as a personal enterprise or a personal enterprise IPO. But you just have to be thoughtful about how to do that. And I've actually recorded a video series on my LinkedIn profile about my summer of being a solopreneur. Well, I think there's 5 or 6 videos that talk through the steps to get there. But effectively, the right way to think about it is let's say take your current salary and divide it by 2,000. And so so let's say that becomes your hourly billing rate, right? In order for you to become a personal enterprise, you probably need to charge 2-3x that to give you enough cushion. And you might be like, well, why would somebody pay 2-3x what they're paying me now? And the reality is that they're just going to pay you for when they need you, and that flexibility of not having full-time payroll on your books is actually quite helpful. People will pay a premium for that. And so there's a lot of different tips and tricks that you can use to make this work for you, but I actually think the same principles apply broadly, no matter if you're in business or social services.
On a similar, I guess, kind of jumping off that question, you talked a little bit about how someone can know their financial solvency, but someone asked, how do I know about my financial solvency and the satisfaction I might find if I want to start my own consulting business?
Yeah. So I'll start with the latter one. I would say the first the most common warning that I got from people was that I would be lonely and not having a community to be around and whatnot. And so I've actually not found that to be the case. So you can read into that what you think about what it means about me and stuff. But I've written an article about being an introvert, which you can find on HBR as well too. And so partly, I think there's a self-assessment about where are you on the introverted extroverted scale, and if you are, I personally think that this is really conducive to people who are introverts, and so if that'll kind of up the odds that you'll find it personally satisfying and enjoyable. And that being said, I have still a small set of people that I collaborate with, freelancers, clients, of course, colleagues and editors that I work with on a writing basis that I don't actually feel lonely, and that I feel my community is pretty robust, and that I've met new people, people that I would have never met, like entrepreneurs and startups, because they wouldn't really reach out to me as a senior partner at a large consulting firm. But like the community that I have now, like, I mean, certainly there are aspects that I miss that has really made me fulfilled. Now, so introvert, and if you have a strong introvert network of peers and colleagues, then you should be okay. And actually, the last bit on the fulfillment part is that the journaling and the writing, really what that kind of made me figure out was that the thing that gave me the most joy in my work was actually writing and speaking. And I still loved consulting, but I wanted a better balance of it. And that's effectively what I've been able to get to, is I have a lot more time to write and speak. And I still do enough consulting to make it work. But I think because I knew that's kind of what floated my boat, being an introvert, I still had a strong community, and I love to write and think and speak. Then that's how I was able to kind of reverse it. I think that journaling aspect kind of gives you the clues of how you will know you'll be fulfilled. So I would suggest start there. Now, on the financial solvency bit of it, it is a bit tricky. And again, I go back to that Summer of Solopreneur series that I did, but there's a principle that I have that I took from a mentor of mine, Steve Carlotti, who was a director at McKinsey, the 248 principle. And it was a thing that I used to measure my own productivity as a senior partner, but I also used to judge other partners, when we were electing new partners or helping other partners grow, was this 248 mantra was any given time, if a partner had 2 live clients, live projects, 4 active submitted proposals, and 8 active business discussions that were general, that weren't about a proposal, but they were substantive conversations with substantive people, clients that were senior enough who might become clients at some point and whatnot, and buyers of professional services firms. If that 248 ratio was healthy, then no matter what was actually going on in the year, you had confidence that you would be all right, or that that partner would be all right. And that same thing holds true. And that if you are, let me put it to you this way: if you are questioning your financial solvency as an independent consultant, is that what you really need to be able to do is your work quality going to be good enough so that when you have a client, that they're likely to ask you to come back. And that's why that 2 is really important, is that, don't remember the Aesop's fable and don't drop the bone in your mouth with the dog reflection, right? What you have is that you have to be able to deliver work with distinction and such high value that your client's like, man, I made so much more money than they charged me, and I really enjoyed working with that person, so absolutely I'll do it again. So if that 2 is good, then you're in great shape. People kind of obsess about the 4, but the 8 is actually more important, is that if you are having 8 active discussions with people who respect you enough to want your opinion, and that within 15 minutes or less, without knowing anybody or knowing the topic, you can advance an idea or solve a question that people are struggling with, then you're in great shape. And that the 8, the ability to have the 8, the ability not only to have the expertise, but the EQ and the generosity to say, yeah, let's talk, and I'm not going to try to sell you anything. And actually, I'm here to help you with no expectation. When you do that, then you build a following, and that when they do have a need, because the ability of consulting is a little bit just it's far more like farming than anything else is you just got to plant a lot of seeds. You got to be thoughtful about how you water them so that whatever the harvest comes that you're prepared for it. But that 2 and the 8 are the most important, and that the 4 is just usually takes care of itself, but there's ways of doing that. Now, the 248 is relevant because and again, you have to adapt it for yourself and what your pricing is going to be. But when you have that ratio down, and you can imagine, oh yes, I have 8 people that I could call on a regular basis just to shoot the breeze and just to be able to talk shop with no expectation. And I think I could, I believe that I could deliver 1 or 2 different projects at any given time. Then that'll tell you about your capacity, like how big is your consulting factory, as it were, how big is your network is the 8, and then the 4 takes care of itself. So if you follow that 248, you adapt it to yourself, and basically, if you can do that and you apply a price to that, and if that is greater than whatever living expenses then you need, then you should feel confident that you could do this.
One other question was, you talked about the life cycle that all sort of industries go through, from niche all the way to decline. What tools could we use to predict or to sort of discern what life cycle the industry we're in is at?
Great question. So that share of growth mindset is a really great metric. And again, I think I've written a couple of articles on that on HBR, so check that one out. But basically, it's everybody measures market share, right? Which is like, I'm in the bottled water category and I have 10% market share there. And what people ought to be looking at is if the category of all of bottled water sales were $100 and next year it became 110, is what I care more about or as much about this market share is what was the source of that 10, that difference between 110 to 100. Where did that 10 come from? Who's driving that growth? And is it coming from inside or outside of the category? Because I think effectively when you have a category that you understand what the sources of the share of growth are, that's a real telltale sign about kind of where you are with it. Because if that share, and again, that same share of growth can be applied to those 3 levers that I mentioned, right? Which is it what's driving the growth? Is it number of consumers? Is it units per consumer, or is it price per unit? And an industry that is largely growing on pricing power alone, where unit volume or people aren't increasing, then that's not a good sign. What it usually means is that you're on that precipice where you're declining from, most people use it most of the time, only some people will use it some of the time there. And that it's not to say that pricing power isn't good, it is good, but you really want to see is that if units per person are growing or number of consumers are growing, then that's really important. And that and you can kind of feel it when a category is changing dramatically. Then you kind of know that it's on the good side of the life cycle curve there. So like I'll give you an example of the global number of video gamers in the last 8 years has gone from about 50 million to 130 million. And it's not that there are 80 more million, teenage boys in dark basements playing shoot 'em up games on their Xboxes. It's really casual gaming, and a lot of women, frankly, a lot of them middle-aged or older, playing, Candy Crush and Words with Friends or whatever it is there. And that it's that casual gaming that's really been driving the growth there, and that it's a completely different economic model. It's a completely different, user experience, obviously, and that, it's a very different superconsumer dynamic. The book that I've written about superconsumers, where in general, within a grocery context, 125 different categories, 400 billion in sales in the grocery store, the top 10%, those superconsumers drive about 30 to 70% of category sales. But in a casual gaming situation, because a lot of them are free or freemium, 0.5% of gamers drive 50% of the revenue. And it's such an extreme amount because the super consumer dynamic is extreme. And it's actually quite common in digital enterprises where I think it's like 3% of the New York Times readers drive 90% of the revenue there. So if you have, you understand the dynamics of category growth and share of growth, then you're in good shape. If you know what's driving growth, people, units per person, or pricing, then you're in good shape. And if you can understand where that super consumer is going, then those are the best three ways to figure out what part of the life cycle that you're on.
We'll take one more question. Someone wants to know, so how might we apply this, the ability to identify growth areas and companies to the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, no, I think that it's kind of the same thing. And so, you know, to a large degree, the not-for-profit sector, you know, you could argue there are some for-profit businesses that look very much like not-for-profits because they're not doing well. But the same dynamic is the case. You have different stakeholders, and so if you, whether it's from the donor side or it's from the end user side, what's driving growth? Do you have more donors, are the current donors giving more? Are your donations per giving event going up or down with it? That good way to tell if you're on the good or the bad side of the life cycle there from a donor perspective. And from an end user perspective, are you having an impact and stuff? And that it's the same dynamic of how many people use your services, how much per person do they use it, and again, I think what really it requires is a more clever and thoughtful way of measuring price, because maybe you charge a price, maybe you don't, maybe it's a break-even cost or what, but you can measure price in a wide variety of ways. There's the financial bit that people pay, and then there's the time that they invest to get the service, or the reputation that they invest to do that as well too. Because you can tell a lot about who's a super consumer or not by what they spend their money on, their time, and their reputation on, and that those same three dynamics I think are absolutely the same and work very much and have a lot of relevance within the not-for-profit sector there.
Thank you. One quick last question would be, what platforms would you recommend people use if they want to become a freelancer?
What platform? Can they be more specific about, I don't know if it's a publishing platform, if it's a technology platform?
Taylor, if you could quickly send us some follow-up for contract writing work specifically.
Oh, for contract. Oh, okay. I see. In general, what I would say is when I do my own consulting, I always say I have two prices: free and very expensive, right? In that you should charge what you believe you're worth for the big things, but beyond that, you should be known as a generous person. Like I view kind of my model as I'll give anyone an uninformed opinion about something about how to grow your business, much like a Costco sample, because I believe that there's a lot more where that came from. And so when it comes to writing on from a freelance perspective, I think people should, the more you write, the better you get at it, right? And so it's a muscle. I wish I had started earlier. And that going back to my Chicago days, even the Little Red Schoolhouse and writing papers were very, very helpful. And I wish I'd actually kept up more of it and written more while I was in college. But you can pick whatever platform that you want, and be it Medium or Quora or LinkedIn, to write for free. And then to me, what you ought to do is aim for the most prestigious, the most widely read platform that you can within your field, because everything kind of trickles down. Like every HBR piece that I come up, usually there's a lot of derivative pieces that will come from other publications and venues that are out there. And so the reason why I say to do that is that the same thing is true, is that everybody needs the content to fill their inventory, and that you'd be surprised at how even very selective publications that they still have those needs there, and that the more you write, the better you'll get. But a lot of my experience has been for even very, very high prestige platforms, it's a lot of who you know and the network that you build. And I would say that it's not like editors are just saying, I want a great piece. What they really want is a relationship that they know of an author they can turn to time and time again when they have a need, and they can get something good coming out of it. And so that's kind of the advice that I would give, is just write prolifically for free as much as you can in whatever platform that's findable for you, and then aim for the best and the highest platform one. And it's tricky, but usually there's a way to network your way to the people there. And when you can be generous and add value there, then I think you'll find that luck will eventually break your way. So.
And Eddie, could you give us one sentence that sums up the key takeaway from your presentation today?
Yeah. Don't swim against the ocean, and ride the wave that is a personal enterprise, and prepare for your IPO in 5 to 10 years. If you do that, you'll be in great shape.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating. A special thank you to Eddie for sharing your tips with us about growth trends you're seeing, and also information to help us launch our own careers as solopreneurs and freelancers. I want to thank everybody for coming. This is part of our Career Month. We still have more webinars this November. We have one tomorrow on scaling an idea, learning if it's the next big thing or the next big flop. So I invite you to join us again, or come back after Thanksgiving, where we'll have webinars on interviewing, salary negotiation, and empathy for senior leaders. Take care and have a great rest of your day.